Hi, this is Wayne, Operations and Finance Director for the National Support Centre, Baptist Churches in New Zealand. I've got Rod Robson with me today, who's the Chair of Assembly Council. Morning, Rod.
Good morning, Wayne.
How are you going?
I'm going most well.
So you and I sit on a committee that's called the Constitutional Review Committee, and that's chaired by Peter Crow, and he's an international governance guru. Also on that committee is Jenny Boshier from Christchurch. We've got Jordan Rapana, Greg Motu, Riwai Takahu, and us and Charles.
Yeah.
And we are presenting on their behalf today
Yes.
and to the National Hui, the constitutional changes. So we're going to chat through a few of the more significant issues in the constitutional change that's proposed. But before I do, just give us 2 sentences, if you're able to, on Rod Robson, Baptist role in the Baptist movement.
Okay, I am a converted nominal Anglican bar pagan bar nothing much, and that happened when I was a young adult. And the first church I wandered into was Remuera Baptist, because it was just around the corner from where I was living. And I have wandered around a little bit, but I've been in the Baptist movement since the early 90s. Been a youth pastor, and Baptists are my people by adoption.
Cool. So you're a pastor. Where do you pastor at the moment?
Opawa Baptist in Christchurch.
Awesome. And so before you grew up and decided to be a Baptist pastor, what did you do in your previous life?
I was a solicitor in the public service, and when I resigned from that, I think I was 32, and at that point I was the chief legal advisor for what's now called the Ministry of Social Development.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
You would have seen a lot of interesting stuff there.
I surely did.
Yeah. Right, so let's jump into the proposed constitutional changes. Now, there's a lot of wordsmithing that's happened that I don't propose that we'll talk about. We have picked up that hui is a word that doesn't have an S on it, whether it's singular or plural, so we've sorted that one out. But we're just going to talk about 3 of the big issues, that we will separately vote on at hui. The first one is to deal with the president and vice president. Now, presidential elections are always interesting. We've got the one in the US coming up in November. But tell me about why we're changing our nomination for president and vice president.
I think it's been difficult to find people to do these roles for quite some time. We don't tend to get nominations. Somebody from Assembly Council, the national leader, goes out and finds suitable people. That probably reflects the fact that the nature of the role and the nature of how the movement is led has changed since we had general secretaries and stuff. We're also quite keen to narrow the number of people that are sitting around the Assembly Council table. It is a big table at the moment. Yeah,
so I guess then what I'm hearing is in recent history, churches haven't engaged in nominating.
Yeah, that's fair.
And essentially that has forced Assembly Council to shoulder tap, to go out and find people, put their arms up behind their backs and say, we reckon you'll be really good for this role.
And I need to clarify too, there's no reflection on recent people who've been present. We've been very well served.
Yeah, they've been really great.
Yeah, they've been really good.
Yeah. So this change is essentially matching practice that's happened over the last few years, as indicated by our movement, and just, if you like, bringing a constitutional change to reflect what has happened.
And it may very well be that in part 2 of this constitutional review process next year, there's more to be said about the president role.
Right.
I've had people suggest to me we need to call it something different, we need to define the role. Those are 2 quite sensible suggestions, but there hasn't been the time to really chew on them at this point.
So we'll get another bite at the roles next year. Okay, that's cool. All right, so let's move on to the makeup of the Assembly Council. Currently, apart from the national leader, president, vice president, and a nominee from Missions Council, currently 8 members are voted on by the National Assembly,
That's right.
Hui, and we can second 3. So 8 get voted on for 2-year terms, and secondees are reviewed annually. What the Constitution change proposes is that instead of 8 getting voted, 6 are, and 4 can be nominated, which is a bit stronger than 3 seconding.
Yeah, it's a co-option process, and we might... So we're going to go from... Currently at the table, there are 11 people there as of right, plus co-optees. We will go to 6 plus co-optees.
Yep.
And those people will be selected in consultation with the wider movement because they have particular skills or experience that the 6 don't have and that we need.
Yep.
But it all will add up to a smaller group around the table, less unwieldy group. Okay.
So do you think, and this is sort of a passion for me, but do you think it allows for a greater voice of our lay people and a particular skill set of our lay people involved in Assembly Council?
I think there's a... Yes, I do. I think there's a change happening. It's not so many years ago that Assembly Council was almost all male and almost all pastors. And that's not a good reflection of the movement. We also need more continuity. It takes a lot of folk, probably most of us, a good year to get your head around the role, and then you're up for re-election a year later. Yeah. And we've had a situation where we've lost 3 or 4 people at a time, and that makes a sense of team really difficult. Yeah. So, yeah, I think this is a good direction to take for the future.
So that other point was, instead of 2-year terms, we're going for 3-year terms.
Yeah.
And we'll cycle 2 people a year, so that at least, barring any unforeseen circumstances, the majority of people are going to be there for, or the majority of the group of the table have sort of 4 years experience at least.
Yeah, I became the chair after 1 year.
Yeah. And I won't say how good that's been for us. Okay, well that's really, I think that's really clear. So let's move on to the big one. It's Clause 36. Okay, why are we proposing Clause 36, Rod?
There's been a long-standing practice, and by long-standing I mean at least 30 years, of how churches that wanted to leave the union, and there haven't been very many to be quite frank, how that process has been undertaken. And we felt that it was appropriate that be more visible than it has been, and I think some of the reaction reflects the fact that it hasn't been very visible, and that we have a mediation and arbitration provision, simply because the cases that I've been aware of, and I've been involved in a couple, they've taken far too long. Yeah. And it's quite a tricky process. Yeah.
So back in 2019, 2020, Paul Collins, who is a Baptist barrister, he did quite a significant review of the Constitution and the Act. And his main thing was the Act. Well, in the Act, he says, the Baptist Union can't be compelled to transfer a property outside the Baptist Union for any reason.
That's right.
Okay. But we can transfer a property outside a church into another entity, so long as that other entity is part of the Baptist Union of New Zealand.
Like a locally based trust, yes.
Okay. So before we go to churches who may wish to leave or who have left, a church wanting to stay in the union, Clause 36 has no impact. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Right. So there's no change in that regard.
No.
So why, if a church wants to stay in the union, do you think there is a concern around this clause?
That's a really interesting question, and I don't really know the answer. Yeah. It's like if you're married, you don't get overly concerned about the rules for a divorce and how property gets divided. If you're happily married, it's not an issue.
Okay, so let's say then a church wants to leave the union.
Yep.
Whether that's to go to another denomination or to be an independent church.
Yep.
Why do we need a mechanism like Clause 36 is providing?
Because, as you said before, at the moment there is no mechanism in the Act for a church to leave to go independent or to go to another denomination or another association and take their property with you. The Baptist Union holds that property on trust for the congregation. Not only the present congregation, but those that have gone before and those that will come in the future.
And I think some people don't understand that is what the Act is about. The Act protects the contributions of previous generations, previous congregations. Is that what Paul tells us?
Yeah, it is.
And it's not the Apostle Paul, that's Paul, the lawyer Paul.
Yeah, I think what has happened in the cases that I've been involved with is there's been a discussion about contribution to the church's assets. And in one of them in particular, it was a relatively new church, hadn't been around for very long, so most of the people that had started it were still there. So we accepted that, but the union, through the association, through Baptist Savings, through other bodies, had contributed quite a lot to the formation of that church. And so the discussion became, okay, so how much, what's a fair amount, and that became the sale price for the church property, which was probably something in the realms of 20%. Now, you might get a church that's been around for 150 years, and there are some of those where the conversation would be quite different. Because the current congregation is a relatively small part of who that church community has been. So it is an art, not a science.
Correct, yeah.
And this is one of the reasons it does take a long time to discuss, and why having mediation and arbitration would speed that process.
So it's not only about what the current congregation has contributed, right? Because the Baptist Union or an association or even a home church that planted that church may have contributed funds or land to an established church, and that's what the Act protects.
Okay. Absolutely.
Okay, so depending on when the church was purchased, and you referred to a relatively young church, is it fair to say that an exiting church may not need to pay anything for their church?
I think that's quite a likely, particularly if it's in the first generation. That's quite likely.
Yeah. And that's reasonable and fair, right?
I think it is, and it is about being reasonable and fair.
Okay, so what if a church wants to leave the union but still call themselves a Baptist church? Are they part? Does the Act cover them?
No, we don't own the word Baptist. We do own the word Baptist Union of New Zealand, right. But as you'll be aware, there are Bible Baptists, there's Reformed Baptists, there's all sorts of other Baptist denominations around.
And even if I called myself the Wayne Baptist Church, that doesn't mean that the Act covers me and I have a right to the land or property that has been established under the Baptist Union.
Will you be worshipping in a phone booth?
Thank you. I think I have a bit more personality to draw, at least than one other person.
Well, how many Waynes are there around?
That's right. Okay, well, my wife and family.
Oh, okay. They're very supportive.
Okay, so some churches have left the Baptist Union without this process in place or in the Constitution, and you've sort of indicated that some have. What happened in those circumstances?
There haven't been that many in the last 50 years, but the more recent ones, there's been extended conversations, and it is a little bit like a relationship breakup. It is tricky, and it has taken quite a long time, too much, I think. And I think having a clearly charted process will help churches and the union in the future if they come into this situation. But the results, in terms of the outcomes, they've been quite different. Each church's history and whakapapa is unique to itself.
But the sort of the contents of Clause 36 have been used anyway in the discussion.
Oh, yes.
I guess what I'm hearing you say is, although it's difficult and we accept that that'll be the case, if it takes time, it takes lawyers' time, and there's a lot of cost involved in that, right? And maybe a lot of that, if it's clear up front, at least we know the parameters of the discussion.
Yep.
Okay. And as you've said, I guess there's no one size fits all, right? Because every church circumstance, every congregation circumstance is going to be Different. Okay. So what if our proposed constitution amendment fails at Hui this year?
Well, really, all this does is formalise an existing practice and process of making the Act work. That practice and process will not change.
Right. Okay. And that's because our lawyers tell us that under the Act, there are, we have to abide by the terms of the Act anyway, don't we?
Yeah.
Which provides for the holding and trust of properties. So there's our Act, and then there's New Zealand trust law that if we, for example, said, Wayne Baptist Church, here's a property, we could actually be in breach of the Act and trust law. Is that right?
Yeah, we could.
Okay, so final question. Some people may be concerned that we've made provision for a mediator or an arbitrator. Why would we do that, Rod?
Speed the process up.
Right.
And I think one of the churches that left in the 90s, there was an independent lawyer who did an opinion, and that was the decision. It gives everybody finality.
Right. Okay. Now, for people who may not understand what's the difference between a mediator and an arbitrator, a mediator helps us make a decision.
Yeah, come to this agreement.
Whereas an arbitrator makes a ruling.
Yeah.
Sort of like a judge, but a whole lot cheaper in the process, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So if the mediation was unsuccessful, that we couldn't come to a decision that everybody could live with, then you can say to the mediator, okay, can you please arbitrate this?
Yeah, okay. And I guess the proposal, the mediators and arbitrators, they will use that filter that's in the mechanism that we might have tried to negotiate in good faith with a congregation, but they'll use that, ensuring that there's good faith, fairness and justice, recognising the contribution that past and present have made, right?
It's just never easy to reconcile competing interests.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Well, thanks, Rod, for coming in and talking to us today. I hope that's been helpful for people. We're always open to hear from people, aren't we?
We are.
We will meet together at Hui and
we'll
discuss this like Baptists do, and we'll see where we go from there. So thanks for coming in. We'll see you at Hui, Rod.
Cheers, mate.
Thank you.